Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's honestly a lot more than just a simple organ. We're going to look at the human heart, but we're framing it as the ultimate biological engine. I mean, think about it. It's a completely autonomous, self-regulating machine, and it's literally pumping inside your chest right at this very second. All right, so here's our blueprint for today. We're going to deconstruct this engine into four main parts. First, the plumbing system, then the electrical grid. Next up are the fuel lines, and finally, we'll look at what happens when the system falters. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The plumbing system. Here, we're looking at the heart's four chambers and valves, basically framing them as this highly efficient one-way fluid distribution network. To really wrap our heads around this network, let's trace the journey of just a single drop of blood. So picture this. It comes back from the body completely depleted of oxygen, right? It enters the top right chamber, that's the right atrium, and drops down into the right ventricle. From there, bam, it's powerfully pumped straight over to the lungs to grab some oxygen. Once it's all fresh and oxygen-rich, it flows back into the left side, into the left atrium, drops into the left ventricle, and then whoosh, it's forcefully pumped out into the aorta to fuel your entire body. Now, for this fluid to only move forward, because we definitely don't want it going backward, the plumbing relies on four incredibly flexible valves. You've got the tricuspid and pulmonary valves on the right, and the mitral and aortic valves on the left. Most of these have three flexible flaps or leaflets, except for the mitral valve, which just has two. But here's the big takeaway. These leaflets absolutely must open completely to let blood pass, and then they have to immediately snap tightly shut so there are zero backward leaks. It's just this flawless mechanical rhythm. So, the physical movement of this fluid is incredibly precise. But, that raises a pretty major question. What actually tells this mechanical pump exactly when to fire? I mean, how does it perfectly coordinate all four of those chambers? Well, that brings us right to section 2, the electrical grid. Because, just like any complex mechanical pump, the heart has its own built-in electrical grid that perfectly synchronizes all that physical pumping we just talked about. Now, what's really fascinating to me is this tiny little structure called the sinoatrial, or SA node. It's sitting right up in the upper wall of the right atrium. This is basically the absolute boss of the heart, and honestly, kind of a control freak. It's your physiological pacemaker. If you actually look at it under a microscope, you'll see these really unique, pale staining cells called P cells, and they're extraordinary because they generate their own electrical action potential. Seriously, they don't sit around waiting for a signal from the brain. They self-excite to kick off every single heartbeat. Let's actually follow this electrical signal to see how it builds a perfectly synchronized contraction. So the SA node fires its impulse, right? That signal then races via these internodal pathways to a secondary station, the AV node. From there, it shoots down the bundle of His, splits into the left and right branches, and finally disperses all the way out into the Purkinje fibers that line the bottom ventricles. This whole micro-narrative of electrical conduction basically ensures that the top chambers squeeze first, pushing blood down, followed just a fraction of a second later by the bottom chambers squeezing that blood out to the body. But, of course, the engine doesn't just run at one constant speed. Your autonomic nervous system is essentially acting as both the gas pedal and the brake for this electrical grid. The sympathetic nervous system steps on the gas using adrenergic receptors to increase the SA node's rate, like, say, when you're out for a run. On the flip side, the parasympathetic nervous system applies the brakes using cholinergic receptors, bringing that rate right back down when you're just chilling out and resting. Moving right along to section 3, the fuel lines. Look, just like any high-performance machine, the heart muscles simply can't pump tirelessly without consuming immense amounts of energy itself. It needs its own dedicated fuel lines, and we call this the coronary circulation. To really grasp this demand, check out this massive number: 8 to 10 milliliters of oxygen per minute for every 100 grams of tissue. That is the heart's basal oxygen consumption rate. Because this engine literally never stops, its metabolic demands are just extreme. In fact, it has the highest oxygen extraction difference of any major organ in the entire human body. To meet that crazy demand, these fuel lines are laid out with pinpoint precision. The left and right coronary arteries branch off right at the base of the aorta, and their specific branches feed very distinct anatomic regions of the heart muscle. For instance, the left anterior descending artery, the LAD, feeds the anteroseptal region. The circumflex artery takes care of the anterolateral side. And why does this matter? Well, doctors actually use this exact mapping when they're reading an ECG to pinpoint exactly which fuel line is blocked during a heart attack. This whole setup brilliantly illustrates a concept called functional sympatholysis. Here's how it works. When your sympathetic nervous system tells your heart to beat faster, it actually initially tells your blood vessels to constrict. But your working heart muscle is like, hey, I need more fuel. So it releases local metabolites like adenosine. These metabolites chemically override the nervous system's command, basically forcing those coronary fuel lines to dilate and pop wide open. The heart is essentially commanding its own fuel delivery based on exactly what it needs. There is, however, a really fascinating mechanical quirk to these fuel lines. When the heart muscle forcefully squeezes during a pump, which we call systole, it physically compresses its own blood vessels. This extravascular compression heavily limits blood flow. Meaning, unlike pretty much anywhere else in your body, the heart muscle actually gets most of its fuel during diastole. It gets fed during those brief, split-second moments of relaxation between beats. Pretty wild, right? Finally, we arrive at section 4, when the system falters. As magnificent as this biological machine is, we do have to look at the clinical reality of what happens when the plumbing, the wiring, or those fuel lines start to wear out or break down over time. Let's start with the plumbing and the electrical grid. Those super flexible valve leaflets we talked about, they can suffer from stenosis, which is where the flaps become really stiff and restrict forward blood flow. Or they might suffer from regurgitation, meaning they fail to close tightly, which causes those backward leaks. On the electrical side, the grid can falter with conditions like sick sinus syndrome. That's when our SA node, our pacemaker, fails to fire off those action potentials correctly, leading to a really dangerous loss of rhythm. Now, as for the fuel lines, atherosclerosis can cause fixed stenotic lesions that essentially clog up the arteries. This restricted flow is called ischemia, and it leads to low tissue oxygen or hypoxia, which you'd feel as severe chest pain, angina. But the good news here is that our mechanics, cardiovascular surgeons basically, can actually repair these lines. They can deploy stents to prop the vessel open, use angioplasty balloons to stretch them out, or even completely bypass the diseased vessel using vascular grafts. Which brings us to the end of our explainer. Every single second, this astonishing biological engine is operating quietly in the background of your life. And knowing what we know now, the structural perfection of its fluid plumbing, the sheer self-generating autonomy of its electrical grid, and the massive metabolic power of its fuel lines, I have to ask, will you ever think of a simple heartbeat the same way again? Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep learning.